Hi. Sorry about that, a bit of technical difficulty. We are live streaming the event this evening, and I was just trying to check and get it on my phone. Anyone who does have it on their phone on YouTube, there is a bit of a lag, so I've not actually appeared on stage yet on the broadcast, but I should be there any moment now. So sorry about that. We'll be uploading the video will become available on our YouTube channel afterwards as well for people who weren't able to see it or who want to go over it again when they get home or tomorrow or any other time. So on YouTube, it's just Spokes videos that you look for. If you want to tweet to other people, I think if you go to Spokes videos /live, then it works. But if you just go to Spokes videos, somewhere or other on there, there's a bit for live broadcast and you'll pick it up from there. Meanwhile, we have an illustrious audience here tonight, and we're all here and present, so we can make the most of it. And I'll hand over to Dave to kick the meeting off formally. Thank you.
Right, well, good evening, everybody, and welcome at last to our Spokes public meeting on the Edinburgh City Centre transformation. Thank you a few thank yous at the beginning. First of all, thank you very much to the Festival of Cycling and Kim. It's a great week, and we're delighted to have this meeting as part of Edinburgh Festival of Cycling. Thank you very much to the Spokes team. There's probably around 10 people involved in organising tonight, particularly Martin over there. Thanks to Augustine United for helping with the technology, and I'm sure it will go smoothly from now on. Thank you all for coming. It's great to see such a big turnout. So tonight we've got a very exciting and positive topic from Edinburgh Council. But it would be remiss not to spend a couple of minutes, first of all, to mention the very disappointing national events yesterday, when the Scottish Parliament voted out the Safer Streets Bill, which would have reduced the default urban speed limits from 30 miles an hour to 20 in urban areas in Scotland. 1 year ago, we were feeling quite positive about active travel within the Scottish Government, but there seems to be, over the last year, a sense of slipping back. 1 year ago, Humza Yousaf had just been swapped over. He was no longer Transport Minister, but during the couple of years or so while he was Transport Minister, there were some really bold and innovative decisions on active travel. He doubled the cycle budget to 80 million a year, and I know that nowadays, now that councils have geared up further, we need more. But a couple of years ago when he did that, that really was quite a revolutionary thing for the Scottish Government. He set up the Active Nation Commissioner post, which is Lee Craigie now. He was the person behind the ordering of the bike rail coaches for Oban and Mallaig, which again was a really innovative decision. And most impressively of all, perhaps, although he's an SNP minister, he publicly criticised 2 SNP councils for scrapping cycle route projects. So we really felt that things were moving forward very effectively at the Scottish Government. Sadly, over the last year with the new minister, there's really been no new initiatives at all outside of the existing budget. Obviously, the existing budget has been used to set up 1 or 2 things, but nothing new. Indeed, there are even worrying signs that car priorities are rising further. Next one. Yeah. As I mentioned, the 20-mile-an-hour decision, which, according to Professor Adrian Davis of Napier Transport Research Unit, called the decision yesterday morally bankrupt. Another example, thanks to a deal with the Greens, the Scottish Government has agreed, in order to get their national budget through, the Scottish Government agreed to introduce a workplace parking levy. Now that is good, we're very pleased about that, but without going into details, the law which they're going to be introducing is going to be a weaker version of it than the English law, which itself is years old. Instead of which the government could have been taking a lead with a stronger version of the workplace parking levy, as they were urged to do by a whole range of transport experts, such as, for example, Professor Tom Rye from Napier, Professor Ian Docherty from Glasgow, Professor David Begg, and also supported by Edinburgh and Glasgow councils. And yet we're ending up with a weaker version. We're not even catching up with England. However, if AT, active travel credibility, is possibly falling backwards or being squandered at government level, it is rising in Edinburgh. 1 year ago, we still had some major problems with Edinburgh Council. If you cast your mind back, you might remember the initial plans for installing the tramline in Leith Walk were incredibly bad for cycling. We felt they were not just unpleasant, but literally dangerous. And then there was the Piccadilly Place problem where instead of replacing the gyratory system with a different arrangement which would have cut traffic, the council decided to retain the gyratory. So we were feeling unhappy. But over the last year, since then, things have been moving in a much more positive direction in Edinburgh. So we're seeing retreat at the national level, but much improvement locally. On Tuesday, we had the annual bike breakfast at the City Chambers, and Councillor McInnes, the transport convener, she used this phrase that she had noticed that conversations are changing. Instead of purely negative criticism from the public, she is seeing constructive criticism. People can see that the council is becoming serious about a more people-friendly city. And so they're able to comment in a way which is constructive rather than purely negative. There are still many problems, of course. There's the slowness of project implementation. There's the enforcement of parking, which is a huge problem for cyclists. But nonetheless, in the last 12 months, there's been a whole series of very positive developments in Edinburgh. So the Leith Walk tram plans were extensively revised, and the new plans are really pretty fantastic for walking and cycling and much reduced car presence on Leith Walk. The council's brought in more active travel staff, and we heard only yesterday, for example, that the Roseburn to Canal project is being resurrected, and that's happening because there's new staff available, new project managers, etc. The bike hire Just scheme is working well and expanding. Cycle Hoop, who run an extensive, the council is offering cargo bike help to Leith Walk businesses during the 18 months when Leith Walk is going to be closed for the tramline work. We're already having car-free days once a month, And of course, there is the city centre transformation, which is the subject of our meeting tonight. I'm not going to say much about the transformation because that's what our speakers are for, but just to mention an overall point, we're really delighted overall with the transformation. It's really an exciting project, but that doesn't hide the fact that within the transformation strategy document, there are a lot of uncertainties and actually quite a few inconsistencies as well. So we have to remember this is a consultation document. It's not an actual final one. But I'm sure tonight in the discussion, many of the uncertainties and inconsistencies are going to come to the fore. But don't lose sight of the fact that we reckon that overall the transformation marks a pretty much a revolution in council thinking on transport and people. Of course, the transformation is about much more than cycling, but what we're particularly interested in tonight is the cycling aspects. And this is a sentence which appears in the council report, where the council approved going ahead with the transformation. They're promising segregated safe cycle routes to provide a seamless connected network, enabling those of all ages to bike confidently around the city centre for work and leisure. So the council is going to publish a final version of the transformation project this autumn in September, costed and timescales, etc. And that's going to be based on the consultation which is now underway. So it's up to the council to make sure that the version of the transformation which is published in September really lives up to this. And when you're making your own comments on the consultation, which I very much hope you'll do, this is an excellent sentence to quote. So some of our early thoughts on the transformation are in the spokesworker, which was on your seat, but our subgroup, which Chris is the leading person, has gone a lot further than that, and he'll be telling you a lot more tonight. So we urge you to respond yourselves to the consultation and try and ensure that the final version of the transformation is everything that we would like it to be. So we're delighted to have these three really interesting and excellent speakers tonight. Daisy Narayanan, who is the leader of the city centre transformation, and we're delighted that she's been appointed for a second year, seconded to Edinburgh Council from Sustrans. So that means she's not just seeing through the planning, but she's starting to see through the implementation, the beginning of the implementation anyway. Daisy is also Deputy Director of Sustrans for the Built Environment, a new position. Then Councillor Chaz Booth, long-standing spokesmember, will be giving a political response. Chaz, as you probably know, turns up at nearly every one of our public meetings, but we've never yet given him the chance to sit at the front table. So here he is. And then finally, Chris Paton, who is a member of Spoke's planning group. And as I said, we've got a little subgroup within the planning group that's working out our response on the transformation. Chris is the lead person on that. Then after the speeches, we'll have our usual 1 hour question and answer and discussion, and that will be hosted by Dr. Carolyn Brown over there, who is from Heriot University, and perhaps equally or more important, she is a co-director of Edinburgh Festival of Cycling. So, without more ado, I shall pass over to Daisy, first of all.
Yeah, thank you. No problem. I have to live up to those double exclamation marks after city centre transformation on your slide. So before I came here this evening, I was just looking at Twitter, which you should never do, or Facebook or Twitter. And, you know, there's this whole thing about this all-powerful cycling mafia that there is in Edinburgh. So I'm with the all-powerful mafia that I've been warned about. So be kind, please. Thank you again, Dave and Spokes, for inviting me. I look back at our discussion when I was here last year. It was June the 13th, so today is the 14th. So it's a year and one day. And gosh, what a year it's been. We had just got agreement from Transport Environment Committee on the vision, the aims and objectives. We had set out, I came here, I set out the governance structures, including the cross-party working group that was set up. And we talked through some of the exemplar cities and where we wanted to get inspiration from and what it is that we were trying to achieve. And also even at that point, last May, June, we were quite keen that it was not just a report. It wasn't just beautiful words and all of that, but it was something tangible. And so we were about a week away from the summer summit. And I remember saying, please come to the summer summit because we need you to come and make that a success. And so that's where we were at that point in time. And I looked at the summing up that Spokes did this afternoon, and it said, and I said in my summing up, and I quote from that, there is some cynicism about whether the transformation will be worthy of that word, but continuing support like from the people tonight is inspiring and can make it happen. And can I say the past year and what's come out today we couldn't be where we are, and I have no sense of perspective anymore on how ambitious we are or how little ambitious we are. It's just, I'm right in the middle of it. But even where we are now, we couldn't be without all of you and the support and the ideas and everything that's come through. So thank you very, very much. I'm so delighted to come back and talk about city centre transformation, but for those of you who know me and have sat through my presentation countless times, you know that I like to start with a reflection on where we're at. And today I'd like to talk about Maya Angelou, who's again one of my heroes. And she says, I did then as I knew how to do, and now that I know better, I do better. And I'm very keen that I'm hoping with city centre transformation, we are now at a moment where there is a renewed sense of urgency about what needs to be achieved through the climate emergency and through all the stuff that's happening around us. And there's also an urgency about, a clear strategic plan to map the way forward over the next 10 years. And we have to do better, and we will do better. It's a commitment that we are making as a council politically. And, as officers, we've come together and we've said we want to do better as well. Just to touch upon my own role, so I've been asked to stay on until September for 3 days a week to take this through consultation and then over the line in September. So I know there was a press release that said a year. So I said to John, is there something I don't know about? But it's still September that I'm with the council. For 3 days a week, I'm back at Sustrans in a new role as well, which is again really exciting. It's a whole different story there. So let's take Let's take a whistle-stop tour of the conversation over the past year. I'm quite keen that I run through some of these slides because I hope that most of you have seen the plans and the strategy, and I don't have to go into much detail. I'm quite keen to keep the Q&A and to make sure that most of the tough questions are directed towards Chaz because I answered questions last year. So some of the strengths that we build on, we have this unique built heritage. We have a very strong civic, cultural, commercial heart in the city centre. We have a public transport that we all use and we love, transport system, and we have a really strong sense of identity. But we have challenges as well. And, I don't need to go into much more. You can see that, George Street being a car park, Princess Street, 5,600 bus trips a day, and the pavements that shouldn't be the way they are in a World Heritage City. We have data as well that tells us that status quo is not an option. We've been saying that from the time we started this project. Status quo is not an option. It's a growing city. We'll be touching 600,000 people by 2040, and we just need to be resilient and start to build towards that. Traffic congestion, there were reports last week, a couple of weeks ago, that Edinburgh is one of the most congested cities in the UK. It's costing the city money. It's costing people £1,000 per annum. It's costing the city £225 million per annum. 80% of residents, as per the Bike Life study in Sustrans, support increasing the safety of cycling, and 74% of residents would like to see more spent on cycling facilities, which I think is huge because safety and perception of safety is an issue. And cross-boundary commuting is the big problem. So there's 95,000 people who commute in from outside the city boundaries, out of which 63,000 people commute by car. So that is a big problem that we need to resolve, and we've been looking at. And freight, cargo, delivery, lots and lots of issues that we've had to bring together as one coherent narrative as part of this. So when I came last year, we had this vision that had been agreed through the cross-party group conversations. And those conversations were really wonderful in setting the direction for the project. It was quite emotive. I remember saying that at the time as well, because 25,000 people live in the city center. City center is home, and some of the conversations revolved around, we need to get our home right before we invite visitors in. So the tension between residents and visitors, the tension between people on foot and bike and cars, the tension between us being a World Heritage Site, but having to look forward to the future without losing the integrity of what makes us special here. So all of that, those conversations have really set the foundation for what's gone ahead. The case for change. So the document, if you've seen the document, the strategy that's out for consultation at the moment, we've laid it out quite simply. It's why, what, where, how, and when. So why are we doing this? What are we doing? Where are we doing it? And how and when, which is a delivery plan, which will come with more detail in September. But the why, the case for change is pretty clear. And to me and to the team and the council, it's not just about transport. It is about social, economic, and environmental case for change. And all three pillars come together for sustainable development of a city. The environmental case is, it's clear. We don't need to, we've talked about climate emergency and change at length. But the social case for me is a compelling one. And, we've talked from the beginning that transport is an enabler to make this a more equal city center. It has to be a more equitable place. For too many people, the city center is stressful. It's a difficult experience, overcrowding on pavements, difficult time-constrained junctions, the dominance of traffic. It makes people anxious. And if you have a mobility issue or a sensory issue, it just makes it even worse for someone who's trying to experience the city center. So making the city center for everyone, making it equal, means creating more space and more time. It means creating more space, more time, making sure there's less stress within the city center, within our streets, and to ensure there's a high quality of place, whatever we do, whether it's cycling infrastructure or pavements or anything we do, the quality has to be up there, so we don't have to keep going back and retrofitting and changing things. We went through quite a incredible, in my opinion, consultation process last year. It was 8 weeks over the autumn. We went with 15 big ideas and 23 quite meaty questions, which we labored over for a long time because, the cynicism that says, oh, these are all leading questions, you know your answers already. We didn't want to be accused of that. And it was a 3 projects, so low emission zone, city mobility plan, and city center. So it had to make sense as a 3 project, but even individually. So 3 questions. One of the key one for me was to test the appetite of the city for change. And the 3 questions were, what do you think? Business as usual, you will see some change. If you want to target investment in certain areas, so west of Edinburgh, for example, you'll see a certain kind of change. Or do you think there's a radical rethink of the city center and the city required? And usually with these things, in my experience, we've seen people kind of generally tend to go for the middle option because that's where you, as an average, land in. So to me, my mind was blown when I saw that what came back through over 5,000 people who responded was over 50% said we want a radical rethink, and over 35% said they wanted to see more strategic investment in making our city center better. So it was just over 10% who said, actually, things are working as they are, things are good. And that has been amazing politically for the city leaders to say, there is an appetite for change. People are saying, this isn't good enough, we need to change. And it's given them, the political leaders, confidence to tell us, go ahead and crack on and be radical and think big. A couple of other things, just in terms of the walking and cycling routes. For me, what was what was key, that over 75% said that they would change their mode of transport they would choose to walk or cycle for short journeys rather than use a car. And again, that is quite powerful for a politician to hear, that level of support. And quite a sad statistic, in my opinion. Only 37% were satisfied with the quality of our public spaces. And for a World Heritage City or city centre, that's not good. That's not good enough. So what did we do? So we appointed a consultancy team. So it's led by Jacobs, but underneath that they have six different aspects, different sub-consultants that work together. Obviously, the council teams come together to make this place-based, and with the political steer as well. So it's been a very, very collaborative. We talk about collaboration all the time, but to me, this has felt like a truly collaborative approach. Consultants usually don't send stuff through to you, in my experience, before it's all been signed off through. But we just didn't have the time, so we're like, let's just muck in and do this together. So we have data. So they got data layers, over 400 layers of data, socioeconomic data, how people travel, how people walk, desire lines, 400 layers of data to start to look at how do we create a walkable city centre. We did some benchmarking work, and the benchmarking, again, one of the things we heard was, but Edinburgh is different. Edinburgh is unique. It doesn't matter what they do in Madrid. Edinburgh is different. So what we decided to do was look at the themes. What is it that we were looking to achieve? And, what were the comparators then? So which cities had a residential population, for example? Which cities had topography that they had to deal with, barriers of topography? Which city was doing digital engagement really well? So, looking at the themes and then looking at different cities to see what we could learn about that specific aspect. So the benchmarking was quite an interesting exercise. It also gave me my holiday list for the next couple of years. And from that, so I call this a formula broadly. Basically, what we did was, we've got the city that has set its aspirations, so its vision, aims, and objectives. We went to consultation, we got a response back, and we have data and expertise. So when you add all of that together, what we came back with was 6 city centre principles, which got signed off in February at the interim report. And you can see very clearly that, it absolutely people first. This is about putting people on foot and bike and public transport, providing them with the priority, enhanced connectivity, permeability, minimizing the impact of motor vehicles and traffic displacement. A livable city centre, again, going back to the fact that people live here, and it has to be made livable for them. Again, livable is becoming a bit of a jargon, like placemaking. What does that really mean? But in this context, it's about people who live here. Enhanced open spaces, so giving more clarity towards what our open spaces are doing within the city centre. Our unique character and heritage, inclusive and accessible. I'm very, very keen to make sure that this is enshrined as a city centre principle, because everything we do has to make sure that it is equitable for all ages, all genders, diversity, people like me feeling comfortable, people visually impaired, any kind of disability. Everyone has to feel that this city centre is meant for them. And the final one is slightly inward looking, but it's something that came back loud and clear through consultation, that people feel that the council just does stuff fragmented. You hear things here, there, and everywhere. So keen to say that whatever happens, all the projects, as far as possible, will be brought together and work towards shared objectives. And similarly, policies that are put into place will make sure that they're holistic and they all speak the same language and they all work towards the same shared goals. How do we do it? So we pulled together, we looked at this. Cities are complex, aren't they? They're complex, they're complicated. And I use the Jane Jacobs quote all the time. I've used this here last year, which is about designing a dream city is easy, but we're rebuilding a living, breathing one, and that takes imagination. So we looked at the city centre from the perspective of someone on foot, on a bicycle, public transport, which includes taxis, someone in a car or a van or commercial vehicles, and we unlayered them all separately. And then we brought it all back into a cohesive, holistic framework. We looked at 5 packages of interventions, which was reallocation of street space, public transport, parking reduction, city operations, and place. And then we redid the layers to make sure that we were working with interventions towards those layers. And then we ensure that there was a data layer that underpinned all of that. So any data that comes in has to inform decisions taken forward. So what did we get to from that? So it's, if you've seen the report, it's quite chunky. But one of the things that we're quite keen to do was to take this complicated work that we've done over the year and make it easy to explain and disseminate and for people to understand what it is. So there's 8 key things we're saying. It is a walkable city center. At the heart of the World Heritage Site, we have car-free streets. That car-free streets is enabled by a pedestrian priority zone, which is in pink. Within the pedestrian priority zone, behaviors change, like you see in other cities in Europe. People know very clearly that if you're in a car or a private vehicle, you're a guest, and the priority is truly for the pedestrian and people on foot and bike, which means your signals changes, your infrastructure that's built in, your public realm gives you cues on how people should behave, place-making elements like benches and trees. It's truly people-focused. And if you've seen places like Waltham Forest or what they've done in other cities, it's that kind of very much pedestrian priority. And we debated a lot about the words to use about that. And we may come back in September with a different form of words, whether it's neighborhoods. It's what we're trying to achieve is that it's a neighborhood, within that area. We've proposed a free city center hopper bus, which connects the communities that live within the city center. And that came from, I think, suggestions that came from Spokes and Living Streets, actually. And, there were drawings that were sent to us saying, can we not do that? The barriers of the topography barriers that we face, we've suggested 4 lifts in different locations. Again, very carefully placed, seeing where the desire lines are and what actually makes the walkable city center. And a reallocation of parking, so removal of parking in 3 streets, Joel Street, Victoria Street, and Coburn Street, and a reduction of parking incrementally across the city center, priority given to people who live there, and blue badges. So I'll run through these very quickly. What we said then was, where do we do this? And we identified catalyst areas, as we call them, and we said if we have these interventions done on a street or a few streets in these areas, then there'll be a ripple effect, and they start to then inform what happens across the city center. And again, going back to quotes, you talk about Patrick Geddes saying, the city is more than just a place and space. It is a drama and time, and that is what we need to do. We need to bring back. Edinburgh is a dramatic city. Let's bring that back. Let's not clog ourselves in traffic. So there's some examples. Very, very, they are artist sketches because we're very keen not to go in and design them at this stage because we're not at that stage yet. But we've said from the beginning, this is a vision-led project, a vision-led strategy. So it's very much, this is what we could be, but there will be further development to see what exactly goes in there. But Toll Cross Junction, tighten it up, Lothian Road becoming an urban boulevard, a green corridor. Princess Street, calming Princess Street down, bringing the gardens in, that's North Castle Street, which doesn't work because as it stands as a pedestrian space because of the barrier of fast-moving Princess Street corridor. So if we can calm Princess Street down and connect the gardens to North Castle Street, for example, and across the different junctions, then we could see a very, very different Princess Street. Victoria Street, taking cars off, making it easier for people to enjoy that magnificent, iconic street that we have. Waverley Bridge, to me, the most exciting thing, because I think if you come out of the station, at the moment you see these big buses belching smoke out. And, that shouldn't be what we're seeing when you come out. You see the castle and you see the skylines in Edinburgh. And the Innovation Mile, which we're working closely with the university who have a master plan. And we're saying, could we not create a mile where you can start to look at where SMEs, technology-driven SMEs can be placed and work with the universities. They have some ideas that we've been saying, let's work with you to see how we can make that happen through public realm and through connections we can make. Delivery plans. So underneath the delivery plan, underneath that sits about 6 or 7 spreadsheets. It's spreadsheet heaven. So there's work being done to see how much it will cost and we weren't ready to come to a committee with the costs at that stage. We have some ideas of what, that need refining, but it's a first stab at what we want to see happen. The first 3 years to me are critical. We have to see change happen in the first 3 years. And you do it through pilot projects, you work with businesses, you try to see where you can start to change things operationally, and then you monitor and you get your data and then you tweak it, and then in the middle chunk of it, you can start to do something really special and magical. But the first 3 years, even politicians need something to say, we did that, and that is, all the city leaders have put their heads above the parapet to do this, and you need to see change happen in the first 3 years. And then and then to me, one of the things I said at committee is we shouldn't have all the answers now. This is a living, breathing document. We have gateway reviews at every point. And at each point we see if we're not finding the impact that we want to see happen, then we should be able to tweak it and go back and say, actually, we need to be more draconian here potentially, or we need to actually soften some of what we're trying to do here. So we'll go to committee in September with a fully costed delivery plan with a funding strategy. So I'm not sleeping anytime soon between now and September. There's a video, I'm not sure if it works, and I don't know how we're doing for time. I may or may not play that.
Well, not much more.
Couple of minutes that I won't play the video, but it's online. It's wonderful. It's got, oh, it's playing. Should I? No. It's online, so I won't play. It's wonderful, and Richard's here, who's kindly given his time to be in the video. A small business owner, Union of Genius Cafe, who directly impacted by some of what we're saying, and a tourist guide who takes walking tours across the city, and he uses public transport, and it's the council or myself, we can come and say all these things, but to hear personal stories, to me, we talked about it last time I came here, it's about storytelling. That's how you make change happen. I'll end, before I end, this open streets, you mentioned open streets is car-free days. And this to me is a real tangible commitment to make a difference from both politicians and from the team. Because, I didn't want to leave the council and me with a beautiful document. However beautiful it is, it's still a document that can easily sit on a shelf at some point and doesn't get delivered. So a car-free Sunday program, the Open Streets program, to me it's messy, it's complicated. I have scars on my back from making it happen. 13 city center streets. I know people think it hasn't gone far enough, but it's it brings out the real issues that happen in a city center. So there's a morgue in the city center, for example. So we have to make sure that there's access, people who live there, we need to make sure that we go right into the roots of the community and they then shape that. And what an amazing opportunity with open streets. This to me is one of my favorite pictures. This is what Victoria Street could be, and without the tarmac, obviously. Over the past months, we've traveled to cities like Oslo, Madrid, and we've learned from them. But to me, through Open Streets, we're joining those leading cities and we're saying, look at us. This is amazing what Edinburgh is doing. And I love the fact that the conversation has gone viral almost. I'll end with spokes concerns, I should say uncertainties that you mentioned. And I hope you don't mind if I just take a couple of minutes to address those. So you talk about lack of clarity and artist impressions, and you're right, they are just artist impressions, they're not definitive statements. You talk about some of the text contradicts some of the drawings. Can I just say it was done so fast? Everything in this project we've been running to keep up. So we've noticed a few anomalies between the text and some of the drawings, and we've gone back and it'll all be re-looked at, and thank you for pointing them out because we need to know. But just to say that the text takes precedence, and even where the images might not align, what you put up there, segregated safe cycle routes to provide a seamless connected network, that takes precedence over some, and of course it all needs design, but that's the principle that we're working on. Lothian Road, it's clearly stated that we will have segregated routes. I know the artist's impression, it's an artist's impression. So just, again, to be clear about that. The detailed design is not done yet. We're not at that stage. But then we want to make sure the principles are signed off in September. So then the detailed design becomes easier, she says. um, the main map, again, shows Morrison Street as a cycle route. We should make that happen, and that's part of the commitment. Leith Street, again, detailed consideration down the line, but that's what we want to see. We want to see cycling there. Princess Street, I know there's disappointment. You'd like to see segregated cycling there. Maybe. Let's see what happens in 3 years' time. As I said, it's a living, breathing document. It might be. What we want to do is see traffic calm there, take traffic off, filter traffic out, and then see what happens and see, do we need segregation, or do we soft segregate, or do we need full segregation? We can start to make those decisions as we see impacts. There's, again, lots of things to review. There's a couple of things that you've talked about: North Bridge, George Street, cycle proposals map, all of that. We'll make sure the graphics are aligned to the text, but the principle is definitely for cycling. We want to see safe, connected cycling infrastructure where I can take my 8-year-old and 5-year-old across the city center without worrying about what will happen to them. And I'll add, I'll end on the note, as Chaz knows, I shamelessly use my kids as props for CCT. And my son is 8, and this is a 10-year delivery plan, and I want to make it 5 years or 7 years. So, the faster we can get there, the more my kids can enjoy this as they grow up. So slightly selfishly, but we are very keen that it's the young people who are able to come in and shape this. We have a young people's consultation out at the same time as the main consultation, and it's interesting some of the stuff that's coming back through that. But for them to shape this is the way forward, and that's what will leave the legacy for the project. I'll stop here. I'm sure I've gone hopelessly over time. There's so much to talk about the project. So thank you.
Thanks very much indeed. Thank you to Daisy. Thank you very much indeed to Spokes for inviting me to speak this evening. My name is Chaz Booth. I'm a Green Councillor for Leith, and I'm the co-convener of the Green Group on Edinburgh Council, and I'm also the Green spokesperson on transport and planning. Greens are the second opposition party on Edinburgh Council. We call ourselves the progressive opposition, and we try also to be a constructive opposition. We support the SNP Labour administration where they are doing things right. And I think they are absolutely doing things right in the case of the city centre transformation. Apparently, I got the invite, I think Dave mentioned this tonight, because I kept turning up in the audience at previous Spokes public meetings and asking awkward questions. So feel free to give me a taste of my own medicine when the time comes, and then perhaps you'll be standing here at the next one, who knows. So Greens have been involved in the city centre transformation from the start. We support the aim of a more livable, walkable, cyclable city centre. My city centre colleague, Councillor Claire Miller, sits on the working group and is actively involved in the discussions from day to day. So I'm going to start by setting out what I welcome about the city centre transformation strategy. Then I'm going to ask a couple of questions about the strategy itself, some of which Spokes have raised, some of which have been kicking around in sort of discussions. Then I'm going to ask some questions about the wider policy and the strategic context within which the city centre transformation sits. And then finally, I'm going to ask some questions about delivery. So starting with the positive stuff. This is bold, it's ambitious, it has vision. I actually particularly want to welcome the process of getting to this point. There has been so much consensus building to get to this point today. Sometimes myself and I'm sure other members of the cycling community say, well, the solution's obvious, just get on and deliver it. And actually, while we may want that, we may absolutely feel that frustration. Sometimes it's so important to build that consensus, to go and talk to people, not the petrol heads, we're never going to convince them, but to talk to people who are really important stakeholders in the city centre, who run businesses here, who are not opposed to a more livable city centre, but just need to be convinced. And that process has really worked, I think. Daisy mentioned that this is not just about transport. It's about placemaking. It's about a greener city centre, more trees, more pleasant places to live, a sense of place. And as somebody who sits on the planning committee as well, I think that's essential. And that is really drawn out in the document. And I think the city centre also chimes really well with the broader work that is starting to emerge from the council on addressing the climate emergency and addressing the broad issue of sustainability, absolutely environmental sustainability, but the other aims of sustainability as well. And that I very much welcome. So, a couple of questions on the proposed strategy. I wrote loads of these and then I thought, no, there are too many there. So I'm just going to focus on 3. Firstly, I wonder from the document whether there is enough real, true pedestrianisation. I think if we had living streets here today, they may well say that actually Edinburgh doesn't have that many genuinely pedestrianised streets. Rose Street is in theory pedestrianised, but you meet a car walking down there most days. It's not a high-quality pedestrian environment. And the document sets out a vision for the Royal Mile and Cockburn Street and Waverley Bridge, and I've missed out a couple, but I wonder whether we've got enough. So that would be my first question. Linked to that, are there enough segregated cycle routes? Do they always follow the most direct routes? Do they always join up? Or are there gaps? And what confidence have we got on delivery? And I'll come back to the issue of delivery later on. I very much welcome the explicit strategy to reduce the availability of parking in the city centre. But, and this touches on Dave's point from earlier on, does the council have the tools? If we get the workplace parking levy as currently drafted, that's a step in the right direction, but there's no guarantee of that because the big backlash from the pointless Tories and the hopeless Labour. I mean, seriously, somehow arguing that the workplace parking levy is against people who work. Well, if there's plenty of people who work who get there by foot or by bike or by public transport, and actually they need a workplace parking levy to try and level the playing field. But Dave raised the point, and I think he's absolutely right. Should this be a broader power? Should we be looking to have not just a workplace parking levy, but a non-domestic parking levy that, for example, would also be able to tackle supermarket car parks? So does the council actually have the powers to deliver a lot of the vision that's set out here? So that takes me on to questions on context. So this document is supposed to sit alongside the local development plan, which is the council's spatial planning document, and our economy strategy. The current local development plan, as anybody who has been to a planning committee will tell you, is woefully inadequate and points in completely the opposite direction to this strategy, to the city centre transformation strategy. The emerging successor to that, the City Plan 2030, looks to be a lot better, but we don't know yet. It's not been published. It's not gone out there for public consultation. It's essential that they do face in the same direction. And the economy strategy isn't really a strategy. It's just a list of projects. And it needs to have achieving a zero carbon economy as the clear strategic aim. Once it does that, then perhaps it will also point in the same direction. But until it does, I think it could potentially be a block to delivery on the city centre transformation. And the Transport Committee that signed off on the city centre transformation a couple of weeks ago also at the same meeting signed off proposals for a low emission zone and for a city mobility strategy. Now the city mobility strategy is good. It does point in the same direction. There are a couple of things that I would like to see improved. So for example, the current draft has dropped targets on modal shift. I want to see those put back in because it's essential that we're explicit and say we need to get people out of cars and into more sustainable modes. That needs to be back in there. But overall, the city mobility strategy is good. The low emission zone is frankly woeful. It doesn't include cars in the outer zone. The grace period for cars in the inner zone is way too long. And the inner zone is designed, perhaps not intentionally, but it's designed to create the high likelihood that there will be rat running, especially around the western end. And the inner zone doesn't cover the western end of the air quality management area. It's essential that that is fixed. So My ask to all of you tonight is to respond to this consultation, but please also go to Friends of the Earth Scotland's website, where they've got a little cyber action, and you can ask the council to strengthen the low emission zone. I think that's essential. Questions on delivery. I mean, understandably, that is the smaller section of the document. But I think it's absolutely crucial that we don't. Jan Gale did a report a number of years ago which was full of vision, but it ended up as a report that sat on the shelf. There was no delivery, and it's essential that we get the delivery right. There has been discussion about setting up a dedicated team within the council to drive forward the delivery, which sounds good, but how do we make sure that we avoid the silo thinking that unfortunately the council is way too guilty of too often? And the timetable. I think I agree with Dave that the timetable is too long. You know, the first car-free streets are envisaged in 2021. Let's have a real sense of urgency about that. Let's bring that forward. Likewise, Meadows to George Street. Let's bring that forward as well. Final thoughts. Please respond to the consultation. It's not, when the Transport Committee considers it, it won't be a beauty contest. It won't be a sense of who has the most votes. But if we have lots of people responding to say, yes, we support this vision, that helps us. It really does. So please respond. If you have specific comments about particular streets or areas you know well, please include them. I am overwhelmingly positive about these proposals. They are bold, they show leadership, they take the city in the right direction. It's not perfect, but it's a really good start. And Councillor Leslie McInnes, Edinburgh's Transport Convener, is to be congratulated on having the determination and the vision to bring the project this far. And I'm confident that she, along with Daisy and the rest of the team, can make it a reality as long as we keep on pushing her and all of them to be ambitious. What a contrast, Dave mentioned it, what a contrast to the craven way in which Michael Matheson caved in to the pressure of the roads lobby and voted down the Safer Streets bill in Parliament last night. At least we have one SNP transport leader with balls. Before I conclude, a short personal note. The Green Councillor group will have our AGM in a couple of weeks, and we've agreed to reshuffle our portfolios. So this is my first appearance at the Spokes public meeting, and it might be my last gig as transport spokesperson. I hope that even from the position of opposition in the last 2 years, we have, working with Spokes and Sustrans and many other stakeholders, managed to achieve some progress on sustainable transport in the city. And I very much hope that I will be back in this role in the future. But to conclude, the city centre transformation is an excellent vision. It's a really good start to creating a much more livable city centre. And with your input and the hard work of many people in the council and partner organisations around the city, we can make it a reality. The council needs to get its ducks in a row, make sure that the strategic documents are all pointing in the right direction, and we need to get the delivery right. But overall, it's a really promising start, and Greens will continue to support and strengthen the project. Thank you very much.
Pass over to Chris, but in case you wondered how Charles managed to fit so much into, well, it was 11 minutes actually. I noticed he had his phone here with the timer. It was actually counting down in hundredths of a second.
Whilst it's setting up the slides, I may as well start. So, thank you for having me. So to introduce myself, I'm Chris Paton. I've been involved with the Spokes Planning Group for about 3.5 years. And when I was thinking about this, I was trying to work out exactly when I got involved. And I remember it was just around the first consultation for what is now called the City Centre West East line. And I think I remember seeing the kind of adverts for it, thinking, oh, hey, you know, this is looking kind of exciting, and it inspired me to get involved. So I'm an Edinburgh local myself, and I was very lucky actually that I grew up in the north of the city, very close to the North Edinburgh Path network, the old railway paths. And I never really appreciated this at the time, but it gave me this kind of transport independence at a really young age, 8 or 9 years old. And I was cycling around the north of the city, visiting friends in different neighbourhoods, Warriston, Newhaven, Granton. And, you know, in the end, I became a very confident cyclist on the roads, traffic didn't bother me. And it was really only much later, particularly a trip I did to Amsterdam, that kind of opened my eyes to this world where it wasn't just a few people that could cycle, but actually everybody could cycle. And that's kind of why I've ended up here today. Yeah. So I do. It's a spokes planning group. That's the group that I'm involved in. And I wanted to kind of briefly cover a little bit about what this group actually does, as I know spokes workings may not be obvious to everybody. So planning group is a group of roughly a dozen people who volunteer to do a few different activities. So firstly, to review and comment on cycling-related consultations, which could be transport, could be planning, could be council strategy, things like the city centre transformation. We also review and comment on planning applications to consider whether development is in the right place, whether the things proposed by developers are promoting safer cycling. And of course, we do engage directly with council officers and councillors, MSPs and the like about pressing matters. We try and drive change that way. And so, yeah, we typically meet every 5 weeks or so, although much of what we do is covered by email. And I hasten to add, we are open to new members, so if this is something you want to contribute to, please come chat to us. So anyway, the reason that you've got me up here on the stage tonight is that I'm co-coordinating or leading the coordination for both the Edinburgh City Centre transformation and also the Meadows to George Street, given that those two projects are kind of intrinsically linked. So just like Daisy and Chaz, it has also started to keep me busy as well. So to the city centre transformation. I guess I want to kind of set the context that we are still collating our submission for this, so we will produce a written submission as well as the conversations that we have. And part of what I want to get out of the Q&A to follow is the feedback from all of you, because I think ultimately spokes should be reflecting and amplifying the issues raised by the members and by the public. And yeah, I think Daisy's exact word was chunky. Yes, I checked. It was 104 pages in the strategy document, and that's not just the environmental assessment. So there is a lot to cover. So to that end, I kind of want to talk initially through our initial observations and kind of the themes that are in our draft response so far. So being positive, let's start with the highlights. So, you know, both Chaz and Daisy have talked a bit about the ambition. And I think it's worth pausing on this. You know, I suspect all of us here, and I know it will come out in the questions, can come up with a dozen improvements to these proposals. But in my mind, this really is by far the most concerted and kind of ambitious proposal to reimagine the city centre in a generation. And I think, you know, the Evening News may not always feel pro-cycling, but I thought this quote really captured it, that it truly is, you know, the biggest transport overhaul of transport in the capital in living memory. I thought that captured it well. So I guess also touching on what both Daisy and Chaz had said, it is easy to forget that not everyone is looking for kind of the same level of ambitious reform that I think I can probably safely assume most of us are. And so there's definitely places we should be seeking greater change, and we will. But I think equally it's very important to respect just how far it is going and to applaud those that are involved in all they've done to put this together. And so, you know, a personal thanks to the two people on the stage here and all the others in the team. You know, I just, yeah, really want to say thank you. It's great stuff. So moving on to some specifics. I think, yeah, the traffic and parking reduction is ultimately key to all of it. Without freeing up space, there's just no way we can have improved walking, cycling, public realm. It is in many ways the underpinning to everything else. So we're pleased to see kind of clear statements around that. Meadows to George Street in particular, I'm extremely excited about. Part of my own commute, connecting where I live right near Marchmont to the north of the city. I mean, that's a pivotal project. And, you know, although there's certainly areas where that can be improved, it's probably it's the highest quality, I think, route that we've seen under development. And it actually makes the city centre west-east link look poorer by comparison. So it's nice to see that even in just a few years, things actually are moving on. We are getting better. Also really good to see that Lothian Road and the bridges, there's now a commitment to cycle routes along them. whilst Meadows to George Street may be the middle route, it's clear that we need to secure key north-south routes on all of the arterial routes, because ultimately that's where people want to go. They want to go across all of these different routes. Just to touch on that, I think it's really important that we get segregated routes on both of those. I know that Lothian Road, Daisy says that the commitment is there. I think the bridges are also very important in that regard. And actually, Lothian Road, I think, is a great example of where lobbying and our campaigning can pay off. This sketch here was done by one of our members in planning group, Marian, two or 3 years ago. And as if by magic, that's what's now in the city centre transformation document. I mean, it's startlingly similar. So I think it does show that actually things that may seem sort of aspirational at the time can turn into things that are acted upon. And, you know, it's an important lesson, I think. And I guess briefly to touch on it, very exciting to see that the bridge that was lost many, many years ago in redevelopment of Waverley Station is set to come back. And especially important now that we've got the cycleways going in with the tram, that we link Leaf Walk, Leaf Street through to the Old Town. So that's great to see. So I suppose moving on to the places where I think more clarity is needed, and you know, very much appreciate the point that's made by Daisy that this is still an early stage, and I think we understand that, but nonetheless now is the time to start saying, hey, here's where we do have some concerns, here's where we want to see it developed further. So there's mention, as Daisy picked up, about segregated and safe cycling routes, and I think we really want to tease out what those mean in practice. Segregated is very clear. What do we mean by safe routes? And that will vary on a place-by-place basis, but we need to see the detail of that and develop the detail of that. And the inconsistency between maps, again, need to just see what that's really going to look like. There's a lot of the talk about the pedestrian priority zone, and we're very excited about that. But again, what are the mechanics that we're going to use to actually ensure, to quote, that people on bikes feel comfortable to share roads with traffic? What does that look like in practice? It's a laudable goal, but we need to be clear on mechanics. And so George Street, I guess, is another one where the details are really going to matter here, in that we're going to have a sort of boulevard-style street. But as stands, there's no specific measures to eliminate through traffic, other than the fact that the street will be reduced in width. You're not stopped from going down it, so will that work in practice? Conscious of time, so I'll try and be quick. So the vertical connections, very welcome. We need to make sure that those are usable by folks with bikes, especially with those with cargo bikes. It's transformative if they're able to get up and down and move through the city more easily. And on the note of cargo bikes, very pleasing to see specific mention of using cargo bikes for deliveries. But again, it's an area I think we really need to talk more about the details of that. And I'm kind of worried that on one level, we're ambitiously about to redesign our street space. And yet, I don't want to be redesigning our street space around loading based on vans and lorries and so on, when we may indeed be at the cusp of actually trying to move, where it makes sense, to using tools like cargo bikes. So moving on to the things that I think are maybe more obviously missing. So it was kind of great to see that Bank Street is closed, breaking the kind of through route for general traffic on the bridges and the Mound. Waverley Bridge to close as well. But I think there's probably an element of surprise that all the other main routes are as intact as they are for general traffic. And the one that really struck me, and there are a few, but the one that really struck me was Leaf Street. I wonder if there's more that we can do there, particularly given the comments made previously by the council that there was no way to fit a segregated cycle route there, and that's why one didn't go in when it was redone recently. If that is the case, then surely we will have to close it in order to provide the safe cycling that we're hoping for. There was I think Chaz actually touched on the low emissions zone, and we'll respond separately to that consultation, so I'm not going to linger on it here. But the boundary for the city centre worries me in the way that it's going to cause traffic displacement. And at the end of the day, there are always boundaries. That is the way of things. But I really want to understand what specific mitigations can we apply to reduce the effects of traffic that's trying to cut round that boundary. One that struck me was Melville Drive in particular, where an amazing number of cyclists use that, even though you might think they would use North Meadow Walk. But actually, Melville Drive is still well used. So what are we doing there to kind of support those cyclists who are going to be on the diversionary routes? Queen Street, probably another example there. One interesting one, when I was reviewing the previous round of materials from a year ago, was talk of strengthening and renewing town centres. And the quote I wrote down was supporting local business and creating neighbourhoods based around walking and cycling. Something that I think is great, because at the end of the day, it's all the better if we can reduce the need to travel in the first place, to live in our neighbourhood, to work in our neighbourhood. And it's not clear to me where that's gone. The focus on the city centre is great. What is happening elsewhere? And in terms of density, let me talk a bit about that on the next slide. So this map here, which is based on the spokes map that you can, of course, buy at the back of the room. There's my plug for the night, shows the kind of current and committed quality routes. And so by quality, I'm not talking about the bits of paint on Forest Road just now, talking about the actual off-road or segregated ones, of which, despite all the talk, there are still very few of today, I hasten to add. So this shows the ones that exist and the ones that are imminently coming, city centre, west-east notably. So if we add in the ones that are covered by the proposed city centre transformation, the picture starts to look like that. And so, clearly that's a big improvement. But I suppose things that strike me firstly are that we really need to make sure that we do those dotted lines, because at the end of the day, if we can't get people into the city centre by bike, how on earth are they going to cycle around it? So Queensferry Street and Dean Bridge, and Dundas Street in particular, I think are absolutely critical for linking to the north. And as I say, the North Edinburgh Path Network is a well-used resource. We must link it to the city centre. And I suppose the other thing that maybe strikes us is that this network is still relatively sparse when we're thinking about a 10-year timescale. 10 years is a long time, so what else can we do? And so these green lines represent some of the kind of key routes that Spokes are campaigning for. So in the interest of time, I'm only going to touch on a few of them. So one that I think is really important is the link to the east. You have communities in Abbey Hill, Meadowbank, really very close to the city centre, ideal cycling distance. So I think those lines along Waterloo Place, London Road, very important. And within the city centre itself, quite a few places where I think we actually have the opportunity to be more ambitious, and this is clearly something we should keep talking about. George Street to the East End, Morrison Street, I'm pleased to see was just an omission, so that's encouraging, and others have also been mentioned. So again, conscious of time, I'll keep moving on. We talk about the city centre, and this project is clearly to be welcomed, but again, it kind of touches on what Chaz was saying. Really we need to think more holistically than this, and as both Daisy and Chaz said, the city mobility plan is going to be published, I think, later this summer for consultation in September. There is a lot riding on this, because if it doesn't work, then everything that we're discussing here tonight is for nothing in my mind. And so I won't go into the details of that, but for us, there's been such a long-standing action in the Active Travel Action Plan to really commit to segregated routes on the main roads, many of which actually have a lot of space. It is imperative that that is actually executed. And furthermore, again, as Chaz mentioned, he's stolen my content, you see. I think City Plan 2030, that refresh of Edinburgh's planning strategy, again, we have to get that right. And one thing I would say is it's not simply about not building housing and so on the periphery of the city. If we do that, it's about making those communities where you can actually live and have services and not need to travel, as I mentioned earlier. So I think there's a lot to do there, and I hope that we'll be working closely with those in CES Plan, particularly after the wider South East Scotland Local Development Plan was knocked back. What can we do to make it better? So I suppose in terms of closing remarks, there's a lot to be excited about here, but clearly it's our role to try and help the people promoting this be bolder. And as everyone has said, we really, really need to get started soon. I think everybody's aware of kind of the timescales around climate crisis, the problems around air pollution. We must not delay. And in terms of things you can do, again, others have mentioned it, but I would just emphasize, really, really important to fill in the consultation responses, even if it is just ticking the strongly agree or agree boxes, if you're pushed for time. And as I say, I really want your feedback, so feel free to drop me a note directly or send it through to the Spokes email address if you forget mine, and it will get routed through. And I suppose that just the last one, to say thanks. As I say, for all that needs improving, there's a lot in here, and I think it makes the world of difference when somebody says, hey, you're going in the right direction. And I think it's a very powerful message when people write to their elected members and say, oh, not you got it wrong again, but hey, keep going. So I would encourage you all to do that. Cool, thank you.
Right, I think that was 3 fantastic talks, telling us about the transformation, then commenting on it in detail. I really like the way that Chris ended up, which goes back to what Councillor McInnes had said at the bike breakfast, that criticism is welcome, but let's make it constructive and positive. So I'm going to pass over to Carolyn now. Just 1 or 2 very quick announcements. We usually give a shout out to any politicians in the audience. I'm not sure, we've got Chaz, of course. I don't think there's anyone else here tonight, although I'm very pleased to see several officials from Edinburgh Council dotted around here and there, so I'm sure they're all listening to what you're saying. Remember at the end of the meeting, there's a stall at the back. If you're not a spokes member, we'd love you to join. And if you're interested in getting involved in planning group, as Chris said, that would be really good as well. Finally, on the spokesworker on the chairs, you'll see there's actually quite a lot of consultations going on different things around the city. So do try to take part in as many of these as concern you, because a lot of drop-ins coming in. And there's one additional one which we heard about too late and to go on here. And that is, as I mentioned in the first intro, the Roseburn Canal project. That's the plan's being resurrected, and there's a drop-in on Wednesday the 19th, that's this coming Wednesday, at the St Bride Centre in Balran, Orwell Terrace, and from 2 p.m. until 7:30 p.m. So anyone interested in those things now, come forward.
There'll be a first of the campaign and we will get this moving forward. And what's of interest to me is some things the council want to do, they will not have the powers to do. So I would like to know if we will get some guidance as to campaigning through our MSPs to pass laws to allow the city to actually improve the structure like this, and even something like to introduce congestion charging in it. Because I can't see how it's going to work without there just being a speed trap around the edge of it. The council doesn't have powers to address that. So the question probably for Chad to say, how would we best campaign? How would we best campaign?
Thanks very. Ooh, that was very loud. Thanks very much for that question, Eileen. So obviously, I raised the issue of do we have sufficient powers in terms of the workplace parking levy? I think if the workplace parking levy, as it stands, goes through, that's a good start. It would be better to have broader powers, but the workplace parking levy will be a good start. Another key question is about whether the council has the powers to deliver these things quickly. Now, Spokes has long made the point that actually going through the legal processes to put in, for example, a segregated cycle route is far too long and far too bureaucratic. Now, I had a motion agreed at full council 2 months ago to say this is too long and bureaucratic. We need to press those down the road in Parliament and government to speed up the process. And I'm delighted that that was agreed by everybody except the Tories, who were just doing their usual. So we are now pressing to try and get the Scottish Government and Scottish Parliament to speed up the process of the traffic regulation orders and the redetermination orders, which are dull but important. Do we need congestion charging? Well, I hope that a bold low emission zone will help us to tackle the air quality problems that are killing 200 people in Edinburgh every year. But if not, then we need to look at what other powers we need. And I do think we need, perhaps at that stage, to ask those down the road. You know, you're not giving councils enough powers, and local communities either, enough powers to do the job.
Could I just add the TRO process, and that is genuinely an issue because that's 18 months. 18 months just gone straight just through process. So a 10-year strategy, actually 8.5 years without any change being made to anything. So one of the things that we're working on as part of the delivery plan is a TRO strategy that we have, so we're not doing a project TROs, but how can we do something that is more strategic and faster? But also I know that there's been discussions with Scottish Government for changing how the TRO process works. And Lee Craigie, who's the Active Nation Commissioner, has been key to that conversation. I was on the Active Travel Task Force, which Mr. Yusuf set up a couple of years ago, and we were very, very strong about that whole TRO RSO process has to be done, has to be sorted.
Yeah, just briefly from the campaigning standpoint, I would just simply encourage you all to keep reading Spoke's work and the Spoke's bulletin. The transport bill is still going through government, through Parliament, and there are things in there that should improve this, but we need to make sure it's as good as it can be. And I will say to the Council's credit, actually, just particularly on redetermination orders, I was very pleased. I think it was a couple of Transport Environment Committees ago, and the Council has agreed that it will not choose not to pursue redetermination orders for small redeterminations during resurfacing projects. So that's a big improvement. Clearly, though, there are larger redeterminations here, so that it doesn't solve the problem, but it's nice to see progress in the right direction.
We have precedents with the trams, the tram act, so we can use, those are the conversations we're having this session.
Good. Let's move on. Jump in the green jumper in the middle. Would you like to take the microphone, sir?
Robert Simpson. I want to thank Chris for the last map he put up, which showed us more than just the centre of Edinburgh. But I'm afraid that Lothian stretches further than Costophon to Portobello and Leith to Liberton. And we're hearing a bit about stuff outside that. It seems to be mostly in the form of a stick to hit people with. Parking levies, congestion charges, Can we have something positive to say about the routes in and out of Edinburgh? Because they're going to be key to making the transport in the centre of Edinburgh sustainable. Otherwise, we'll still be flooded with these 63,000 cars a day coming into Edinburgh.
One of the things that we've talked about is strengthening the park and rides. So, additional park and rides, stronger park and rides that do more. So, click and collect. They can do more. They can be hubs to do more. And then within the city centre, you could have micro hubs and things like that. So, changing the way we manage how people move in the wider city and then in the city centre. Orbital routes, we're talking to Lothian buses to say, can we relook at some of the routes and then make it easier for people to choose to take a bus, for example, or take public transport, for example. If the tram line 3 goes up to Pile Quarter, then we're talking about then potentially a spur. So yes, absolutely. There can't be Fortress City Centre. They cannot. It depends on what happens in the wider city, and then that depends on what happens in the wider region. So everything is interconnected. There's the STPR2, which is a Strategic Transport Projects Review going on through Scottish Government, which is looking at regional big projects. And again, that the timing of all of these things is so well aligned that we can start to make things happen at that regional level that can have an impact on what happens on a street in Edinburgh city centre.
I would also say that a key part of the city centre transformation is about transport interchanges. So improving the usability, in particular of Haymarket and Waverley, but other public transport interchanges as well, to make it easier for people to use public transport to get from the wider Lothians into the city. One other comment, I also sit on Sestran with the South East Scotland Regional Transport Partnership. Unfortunately, they no longer have a capital budget to do, for example, long-distance strategic cycle routes, and they rely on individual councils working together. Now, I have to say, councils are not always very good at working together. So, two things need to change. One, we need to get those capital budgets back for the regional transport partnerships, but also we need to get better at individual councils working together. Us with East Lothian, for example, to do a strategic route through Musselburgh. That needs to get a lot better.
Yeah, I briefly, for those that are following Sheriff Hall, I mean, in some ways it's great that the government have committed to, a fairly credible, actually, active travel provision in that new junction. The links on the other side, on each side, though, are very, very poor. That is clearly an area where councils do not seem to be working well enough together, so I hope that will improve.
It's worth saying that Councillor McInnes has set up a regional group that's working with the bordering councils. We've had a couple of meetings, officers and Councillor McInnes to look at exactly that and looking at some specific projects to see where the connections can happen better. So the ambition is there and starting to take steps to make that happen.
Oh, let's go to the front row.
So I think if this all works out like planned, it will be amazing and it will make everything so much nicer. And providing infrastructure is the first step, but then also to ensuring that infrastructure is used as planned, I think is really, really important. Because at the moment, there's so many really disappointing things, like, segregated cycling on Leith Walk, and you have cars parking on the segregated cycling, on double rails, on the pavements. It's just, it is really disappointing and it's dangerous, and it ruins everything. So how will you make sure, or what's the plan for making sure that this won't be abused, especially if you talk about reducing parking in the city centre?
That's a $1 million question, isn't it? Well, a few things. I think first of all, good design can, you can design out some of the issues, and hopefully going forward, the projects will start to look at, what's being done, best practice, in Amsterdam, or so bringing back some of the best practice, design out some of the issues that we face over here, filtering out some of the traffic as we're doing citywide and city centre-wide will help with that as well, reducing the volume of traffic. But there is a huge behavior change, culture change piece that needs to happen. So you can build all the best infrastructure in the world, but if people don't change behaviors, it's, as you said, it's going to mean nothing. So as part of the part of what we bring forward in September is a behavior change strategy that, will hopefully underpin how things can go side by side. And we've said in the document, we've talked right at the outset, it's a call to action. Everyone needs to take responsibility for changing behaviors personally. Organizations, schools need to start to embed, cultures in. So there's technology can help with, some of the enforcement going forward. If you have a data center, if you have an operation management center, that could help. But all that technology and infrastructure can help, but that culture change has to happen through all of us behaving better.
I was going to say, I'm not sure I have much to add to that one, other than to agree with Daisy there. I suppose one thing that occurs to me is time helps, and over time you see attitudes change, and so much as we need to press so hard to make things happen faster, I don't doubt that things just simply will be getting better over time as attitudes naturally shift. The question is, what interventions can be made to try and really bring that forward?
No, I was just trying to look up. So the question was, what can we do to get better at enforcement? And I was just looking up the detail. I think I'm right. I haven't found the detail. I thought I had it somewhere in here. But the charge that you get for parking in the wrong place, I think it's called a penalty charge notice. The last time that was increased was more than 10 years ago. And it no longer acts as a disincentive to people to park in the right blooming place. And that power to increase that charge doesn't lie with councils, it's the Scottish Government. So that is, now that, please be clear, I'm not making excuses for poor enforcement. There's a lot more that the council could do as well. And in particular, I went for a walkabout about a year ago with a parking attendant. And one thing I found is that a lot of drivers in the city centre regard a ticket as just the price of parking in the city centre. But what they are terrified of is their vehicle getting towed. And we need to tow them more often. Because as soon as they're given a ticket for parking in the wrong place, we can tow them. But we've only got one tow truck working the whole of the city, and they don't work weekends. That is crazy. We need to have more resources to uplift people who are parking in the wrong place, on cycle lanes, for example, and then once people get the message that actually we're serious about this, then they won't park there anymore.
Okay, we'll leave the grace period because there are other people that would like to come in. The gentleman there who was very patient at the beginning, just behind you.
Thank you very much. Yes, I think that transformation is wonderful as well, and I was interested in your use of the word transformation. If you go about a half a mile down the road south from here, you come to West Cross Causeway, and there on the wall is a dirty great notice that says at the top, transformation. And that notice has been there for quite a while, and a number of people have been working away trying to transform it. All the sorts of things that are in this plan, pedestrian friendly, sense of place and so on. Been there 10 years. The TRO is now with the government. So we hope it will get through. In 6 months' time, you'll have a shovel-ready project. All it needs is money, and you'll be able to show the people of Edinburgh exactly what transformation looks like. Are you prepared to put some money into the West Cross Causeway?
Chaz, I think that's
Can I just say, I love the Causey project. I love it.
I think it's a brilliant project as well, and believe me, if I was finance convener, then it would be up there as a top priority. I mean, certainly, my colleague Steve Burgess, who's one of the ward councillors, is a very strong supporter of that project, and we are trying to encourage the administration to consider it very carefully. So, and we will keep on doing that.
I take your point. The frustration that I know Isabel like you quite well. We worked with my Sustrans hat on. We work quite closely with the COSI team, and it is frustrating because it's really community led and it's beautiful, and what they've come up with is lovely. So hopefully, I mean, that was the challenge with city centre transformation as a project, was at some point we had to draw a boundary around what the project area says, and then we could recommend, what happens further afield, and then whether the city mobility plan or the other delivery projects, project teams could then take that up and run with it. But hopefully, we need pockets of these examples of good practice. Open streets is an example, just as an analogy, I suppose. Just having done that, 2 months, we've done it twice now, 2 months, and I'm getting emails saying, can we have this here, please? And can we have it in Lee? Can we have it there? And we need examples, tangible examples to say, actually, this is what it looks like. And so.
Right. I've got Angela. Angela. No, Angela. Open streets, yes, Daisy. Open streets, great idea. Not enough streets, obviously, for my liking. However, I've been involved in it for the past 2 Sundays that we've had it down at the grass market. But actually, cycling to the grass market is quite difficult on a Sunday because out there we've got free parking. So we're trying to ask people not to come into the city centre with their cars and use these open streets. And yet we've got free parking. What is that all about? When are we going to get rid of Sunday free parking? No wonder you only need 1 lorry. You don't need a lorry at the weekend because it's free parking. So that's my question.
The past year I've had many moments of, but we want this to happen, we're doing this, but then that's happening here, how can we? I'll give you an example, an open streets example of when we had the 5th of May date, and we found out as the plans were progressing that on the same day, quite soon, it was just a few weeks before we were going, it's happening, that there was a supercar rally happening, and there was a street closure which was happening quite close by, a day and a half. So, yes, I share your frustration, but I know that there are plans in place. Charles, probably you know more than me in terms of the parking strategy, but there is ambition there, I think, to stop free parking on a Sunday, but I don't know the detail of that, sorry. Charles, probably.
I don't know the detail of the Sunday parking, I'm afraid. I do know that we are expecting a report to Transport Environment Committee very shortly. In fact, I think it might be coming up not next week, the week after, whenever the next one is. There's a committee coming up very soon, which will expand the controlled parking zone to include Leith and Gorgie and a couple of other areas. And that's work in progress. So they're doing a strategic review of parking across the whole of the city and introducing controlled parking zones, which effectively means that residents need to buy a permit, and that if you don't have a permit, you're likely to get a ticket or lifted. I think that will help a lot of the parking pressure in, for example, my ward of Leith, and areas like Gorgie where there is a really intense parking pressure. And actually it might also, if the council is a wee bit joined up and uses, for example, the opportunity of the new controlled parking zone to let people know, residents, when they apply for a parking permit, well, did you know about the car club? Or did you know about the cycle hire scheme? Or did you know, here's a spokes map? Or you can get a special reduction on a Lothian Buses rider pass, something like that. Let's have some joined up thinking so that when we expand those parking restrictions, we use that as a nudge to people to say, do you actually need your car?
Can I just, a quick point on not enough number of streets. We've had the inbox, that the Open Streets inbox gets the whole spectrum of how dare you shut one street to how dare you not do the whole city centre. So, I completely understand, and what we've set out is an aspirational loop that, as things develop, and the first 2 have been so positive. There have been issues, and we're learning from stuff, and we're going to change things as things progress. But I'm really confident that we can start to actually reach that stage, and who knows, maybe we can start to use open streets to test out some of the city centre transformation streets and then grow from there. So yeah, I hear you. If I had my way, we could have just done that aspirational loop first, but.
Right. I was going to say, just specifically on the Sunday point of parking, Chaz, you might correct me here, but I'm reasonably sure that went through committee, and I think it was a little bit disappointing for Spokes actually, because it's quite a delayed start that was agreed rather than the 8:30 in the morning. So my understanding was that should actually be in the pipeline, but. I thought it was a little bit more recent than that. Maybe. Yeah.
It's to allow people to get to church, I think.
I think that is indeed the reason. Yeah.
The gentleman at the back is waving.
Thank you. Brian Curtis. I live about just off Milton Road, 3.5 miles out of the city. Oh, it's a suburban delight. I've got roses growing around my door and strawberries in the garden. But people are using the side roads as park and ride. And the more we hear about this great plan, it is going to force people to the edges of town. They don't seem to, well, the park and rides are pretty well used, but all the time there are these cars just coming off the main arterial roads and parking in our nice quiet streets. And if you look at it, particularly along the Gilmerton Road, for instance, there's an on-road cycleway, and you can't ride in it because there are so many cars. So those are really issues that on the way to the hospital, of course, the cycle lane there, they had to put yellow lines within the cycle lane. So, yeah, I'd like to hear the comments from the council on that.
So a slightly different issue about the wider effects of city centre transformation.
I mean, I think this sort of comes back to the point that I was making, that we need the council policies and strategies to all be pointing in the same direction. The city centre transformation is brilliant, but it's not a silver bullet. It will not solve all the problems on its own. So we also need a bold low emission zone. We need a parking strategy that starts to say to people, actually, you need to start paying a little bit more for your car parking space, but actually, do you really need it? Let's nudge you into, the car club. Okay, some journeys do need a car, but do you need one for every day, and do you need it to be sat outside taking up public space all the time? So, joined up thinking from the council. Easier said than done.
I agree. I can't add any more to that.
Okay, the next question. Do you want to... There's a lady there in the yellow jacket. Could you introduce yourself, please?
Susie MacDonald. It's sort of similar to the last question. There's a massive amount of housing being built in Edinburgh South area, but the cycling is very, very poor for safe cycling and segregated cycling in that area, especially with the hospital expanding and Dalkeith Road is getting busier and busier. What is getting done to make Dalkeith Road, for example, a segregated cycling area?
So, I mentioned that I'm also on the planning committee, and on Wednesday of this week we went out on our annual tour of sites. We started off, and it's not necessarily, it's previous sites that have previously been granted planning permission, and we go out and we have a look. And those who have been on planning committee for a long time can see the process that it comes through, from the drawings in front of you, from the decision that you make at committee to the actual bricks and mortar on the ground. And the first two projects that we went to were bland, dreadful, out of town, housing developments. I'll probably get sued if I mention the name of the volume house builder that was producing them, but they could have been anywhere. There was no cycling provision. There was really badly designed and thought out shared space that wasn't really shared space, because then they had a white line saying cyclists have to go this, pedestrians have to go this side. So that's the importance of having the successor to the local development plan, which will be called the city plan, ensuring that the spatial part of it, in other words, the sort of map bit of it, has lots of high-quality segregated cycle routes and walking routes in there, and it has them costed up. Because at the moment, at planning committee, when we get an application coming before us and there's no cycling provision, we say, is there a provision in the LDP that we could condition the developer to provide? And if it's not costed up, we cannot condition that. We have to just grant the application. If it complies with all of our other policies, we just have to grant it. That's not good enough. So that's the council's responsibility, to make sure we have a worked up LDP with a map, high quality walking and cycling routes that we can require of the developers. But actually it's also more than that. It's about ensuring that we have the right policies. So the areas that are highly accessible by public transport, walking and cycling shouldn't have car parking. They shouldn't have any. And at the moment they do. The council recently took a small step forward, and that we no longer have a minimum parking provision. We now only have a maximum parking provision. And some of the slightly more enlightened developers are coming forward with zero car parking. But actually that needs to be the norm. We need to have zero car parking provision except for a few disabled spaces, and all of them must be electric, because the residual, number one priority is modal shift, getting people out of cars into more sustainable modes. But there will still be some cars on the road, and I think those ones need to be converted to electric.
It's just worth saying that the City Mobility Plan is working closely with the City Plan 2030 to do exactly that, or from what I see. The conversations I'm hearing, and I think it's as Chaz said, all these strategies have to point in the same direction. Otherwise, if you don't have the arterial segregated routes coming into the city centre, then there's no point having a beautiful city centre that does everything that it's meant to do on the tin. It won't do it. So that has to happen. The arterial routes have to be segregated. They have to be on road, and you have to make sure that it's safe and people can bring their kids in to cycle if they want to. So, and the City Mobility Plan says that's one of the aspirations for what's going to happen. And then the action plans that drop out of it, like the Active Travel Action Plan, will then start to build on that principle.
So I just thought something else that I was going to say that the new City Plan 2030 needs to say, and that's reducing the need to travel in the first place. So these places that we visited on Wednesday, they were just houses. There was no facilities, there was no shops. If you wanted a pint of milk or a loaf of bread, it was really difficult to get that without getting in your car. So we need to design places that minimize the need to travel in the first place.
With regard to the south of Edinburgh, yeah, just that one about segregated cycling on main roads is very frustrating in a sense, because it's been in the Active Travel Action Plan for some time now with virtually no progress. So I really hope that's one that can be accelerated. And Chaz had touched there on, as I said in my presentation, something we do in planning group is review planning applications. And it's very, very frustrating that when the council, when we want to put in a segregated cycleway as a retrofit, there's huge quantities of process and bureaucracy, but yet developers can put in absolutely appalling cycling infrastructure with blind corners, crap surfacing, and for all the objecting we do, it doesn't have a material bearing on the outcome. That bit is really, really broken for me, and I'm not sure whether that's a council problem or a government problem, but the fact that retrofitting is so hard and planners get away with murder, it's awful. We need to change that.
Goodness me, we've got lots of people. We've got lots of people. Oh, let's go over here. I'm just right. Sorry, Martin. We're going to make Martin run around.
Thanks. Thanks, Caroline. Graham Hart, Hearts Lakery. First of all, massive credit. No, I'm just going to say a couple of comments. I was going to say, this isn't a comment, this is a dramatic monologue. I'm joking. Well done to Chris, by the way. Excellent contribution. We've not met before, but I was excellent attention to detail on that. Just got a question about the integration with existing cycling projects in the city centre transformation. And Chaz just touched on it there with council policy being modal shift. And everyone's mentioned already about arterial routes into town and so on. And something that struck me very recently with various consultations that are going on is, my concern is that the current projects are already, because of the delays that we've had, are totally obsolete. I mean, for example, the I mean, just even talk of Roseburn to Canal. Why are we trying to funnel people down the canal? I mean, all we've been talking about tonight is arterial routes. And if council modal shift is to be achieved, then the canal can't do it because it's far too narrow, and we're already getting folk pushed into the canal as it is. So that's my main question. I'm really concerned about the obsolescence of existing projects and how we can, if you like, refocus those projects onto arterial routes to support the city centre transformation, to support the movement of people in and around that. And just an observation, I hope that we can take the principles of city centre transformation into the town centres that we have around Edinburgh, and then that would help development. Thanks.
We'll take that one about not going back to old projects,
Yes.
that are now out of date.
Yes, it's a really tricky one. I totally hear you. I mean, Roseburn to Leith as well was designed when, oh gosh, 4 or 5 years ago. And you know, if the council were to design it today, it would be very different. And that's frustrating, really frustrating. But you've gone through the process. You have to have spade in the ground. You know, things have to move on. But I know that there is the active travel team within the council is now obviously expanded, and there's more resource within that team. There's greater joined up working, and CCT has come in and hopefully provided an umbrella under which, and hopefully a direction in which we can all work together. So there must be, I'll go back and check whether there is, they are going to go back and look at the list of projects. I think there's papers made public today for the next committee, and there's an active travel list of projects, whether they've gone back and reviewed what was in the pipeline and then seen how it reshapes it to the current objectives that the council have. But yeah, share your frustration at that. The second thing about town centres, yes, that was the first aim was that the city centre transformation will not disbenefit the town centres. And we did a multi-criteria analysis of the 3 scenarios, and the second scenario was what we call local. It was exactly that, looking at town centres and as neighbourhoods, and then making it easier to walk and cycle within those. And what we're hoping is that the city centre it provides an exemplar for how it can be done, and by providing the arterial routes to connecting to the town centres, the Stockbridge, the 9 of them, and then orbital routes, public transport links, orbital routes, then that starts to create that momentum for town centre, complete change of how town centres work. So yes, through being an exemplar of how things can be done, and through strengthening the connections between them, we should be able to do that. She says,
we're starting to get towards the crunch point where we have to wind things up. So I'm going to encourage everyone to have short, concise questions and some short, concise answers from the panel.
Can I give Graham a short, concise answer? So I hear your point that we perhaps should consider whether it's wise to be funneling lots of cyclists to the canal. But my kids are 9 and 6, and they really relish that segregated infrastructure. So I don't think it's a case of do we promote the canal or other segregated infrastructure, or do we prioritize arterial routes? We have to have both. Now, here's a controversial suggestion, because the obvious question is, well, how are we going to pay for it all? The 10% target was really hard won, but maybe we need to scrap it. Maybe 100% of our transport funding needs to go to transport priorities. In other words, modal shift, delivering carbon reduction. Perhaps that's a way forward.
On that note, come on, ladies and gentlemen, right. And we'll come back to the lady right at the back there. Sorry, Martin.
Thanks, I'll make it quick. How within the city
Introduce yourself, please.
Oh, I'm Simone. How within the city transformation plan do you see pedestrians and cyclists interacting safely? So the cycle paths down Leith Walk, it's not always clear to a pedestrian that there's a cyclist coming down. They're very blurred and grey. So how do you see that happening in the new plan?
I think, yeah.
I'm going to be cheeky and go first. So I think from the spokes standpoint, yeah, this is where detail and quality really matter. And I think Leaf Walk in particular, the current section of Leaf Walk with the flush level surfaces is not what you see elsewhere. I'm seeing shaking heads. So we are quite in agreement that we need to go back and revisit that. What I'm seeing for Meadows to George Street, whilst it maybe could be wider, I think is much, much better in terms of the separators, the mini curbs. So it's about getting the detail right is my take there.
Yeah, I mean, just talking about Leith Walk there, because it's a really interesting one, and there's so much opposition to what's in, justifiably to what's in the ground. But it's worth remembering that that design came on board 5, 6 years ago. I can't remember, around then. 7 years ago. 7 years ago, when the conversation was so different. It was, everybody in this room knows what the conversation was then. And we fought so hard as Sustrans to say, take lanes of traffic out. We've taken 2 lanes of traffic out of Leith Walk. And it's not perfect by any means. And again, as I said, if we were to design Leith Walk today, as we would do when the trams go down, it's a very different Leith Walk. But I think it's good to put that perspective that we did take away 2 lanes of traffic when no one thought that was possible. Doom and gloom, the city would come to a halt is what, as my colleague Anna is here, we heard that all the time. So just wanted to say that, detail is going to be critical, and speed, for me, that's, as you were saying, you can't get projects becoming obsolete because, by the time you finish designing something, it's 3 years on, it's just obsolete. So speed and good design. We have so much good guidance out there, from the Dutch Crow Manual to London design guidance. There is and our own street design guidance in Edinburgh is amazing. So we just need to crack on and do just crack on and do it well.
I agree with Daisy.
Excellent, let's move along. Some more questions? You've got to make it short, though, okay?
You can do it.
I can do it, yeah. Definitely. Well, one quick one that's come up, and that is, how much does it cost for a tow truck? Surely we could crowdfund one, and the fines would go to running it. Right?
I didn't hear the question.
How much to crowdfund a tow truck? And the question I was going to ask is, journey generators bring cars in, hospitals, venues, workplaces. The problem comes when they all arrive and leave at the same time. If you reduce the amount of parking, particularly on street, we will control that flow and that congestion. And I can remember pre-1970, we didn't have yellow paint. It was like your controlled parking zone. You were told where you could park, and where it didn't say you could park, you got lifted. We didn't need yellow lines.
There was no question.
Well, how are we going to get? We're going to get to that. Can we deliver elimination of on-street parking in the city centre?
So what we're saying is, at the moment, we're removing parking from 3 streets, so George Street, Cockburn Street, Victoria Street, and then we'll incrementally reduce parking, and then we'll see the impact that's having. And there's car parks that we should be using better. There are car parks that we could be bringing into council management. Yeah, and then start to see how we can work, minimize as much as possible parking spaces on street, and use car parking spaces differently, parklets. Let's start to do that in year 1. So get parklets in, get benches in, show people how lovely it could look, take it out. So restaurants have car parking space outside. They can bring revenue in through, seating there, things like that. So, yes.
I'm sure some of you will have seen the thing going around on social media recently about the new administration in Amsterdam that had a target of, was it 10,000, 15,000, something like that, car parking spaces. They had a manifesto pledge to remove that number of car parking spaces, and they went in and they did it. And the transformation that it delivered, not just in transport terms, but actually in sort of greener neighbourhoods. Daisy talked about mini parklets and sort of growing areas. It was just amazing, and it brought neighbourhoods and neighbours together. Fantastic. Yeah. Let's have some more of that. And that was a green mayor who brought that in.
I think there's something about using car parking spaces differently and to create calm spaces on our streets that we need to bring back, and it's easily done. It doesn't require millions and millions of pounds of investment, and as I said, year one is going to be so critical to show these changes that can be made, and that's one of the parking spaces is one of them.
Okay, we're going to take one more question, and I'm just going to tell them now, I'm going to invite our panel to just sum up after the final question as well. Okay, so just give you a slight moment to think what you might want to say. And the gentleman's right next to you, Martin, just so you don't have to run very far.
Thank you.
I'm sorry for anybody who's missed out, but this is our last question.
It's Mark Hartle. I have a very short question. The Telford Path has recently been resurfaced, part of it, and there's also a really nice development down on the Lower Granton Road at the moment. And I'm curious as to how, I'm not an engineer, how the decision is made regarding the surface material, because the water drainage is very poor. You get a lot of surface water, and in the winter it just freezes like an ice rink, and not all of them are gritted. So I was wondering if you're going to plan some of these developments, if you think a little bit about drainage and surface material.
Absolutely. Okay. A nice technical question there from Mark. I think Daisy, that's your department.
Yeah, I mean, sorry, I don't know the technical specifications for that specific path, but again, coming back to what hopefully will go in the future is high quality design. SUDS, we're working with the SUDS team. I love what Chris Boardman's doing with the bee network. Getting biodiversity as part of the greenways, and we're talking about climate change. We need to get more green in, and yeah, absolutely, that'll be key. More porous, exactly.
Yeah. Okay. I'm going to go to the beardy person first. So, Chaz, would you like to just give us a final thought from this evening? Thank you.
So please do respond to the consultation. Please also respond to the low emission zone consultation. Please respond to this one saying, it's great, let's go further. Please respond to the LEZ one saying, it's not ambitious enough. You need to get your ducks in a row and all your policies pointing in the right direction. And my semi-final comment is to say thank you again to Daisy and also to Councillor Leslie McInnes, actually. Obviously I'm a politician, she's a politician, but she's in power, and she's the one who's getting a lot of the criticism from those who are opposed to this move, but she's showing leadership, and I think that needs to be thanked and welcomed. And my final comment is I'm deeply disappointed that there's no Trondheim-style bicycle lift on Dublin Street.
Put that in the consultation, Shaz, you might get one. Summing up, what can I say? Can I get Chris on the team, the project team? It's just, I think, the past year we have been running to make sure that, there's a small window of opportunity to get things in place. And it's been a very, very intense year. And the support that I've got and the team have got and the politicians have got from us in this room has been phenomenal. And I think it makes such a difference for Councillor McInnes, for the administration, for all the politicians to hear that thank you and to say, this is the right direction, because they get so much hate mail. They get so much rubbish. I've got a tiny fraction of what she gets, and it is terrifying. It genuinely is terrifying when someone threatens you, and you've got little kids. So please say thank you. I think council officials, I have learned over the past year, work so hard. It's unbelievable what they do under pressure. So again, when you see that they're doing good work, please say thank you.
Yeah, so I guess I was a little bit worried that perhaps the things that I said might duplicate everybody else, that it was maybe all a little bit too positive. But I suppose I'm kind of reassured that actually a lot of the comments here tonight have also been positive. It's nice to see that there's kind of broad support for this. Nonetheless, a few of the takeaways that I've particularly got that I will include in the response: Sunday parking, obviously. the points about park and ride on side streets and the kind of wider impact of the city centre. I think that was a good one. And actually, towards the end about permissible parking, I mean, I hate these blooming yellow lines everywhere. Why, you know, the places where we do have on-street parking, it should be marked out. I think that's, it comes back to what Daisy was saying about stress-free streets. Why do we have yellow lines everywhere? So I guess just to close, anything else you want to contribute, please do get involved. Email me, email Spokes, and all going well, we should have a response in a few weeks. Keep me busy.
Well, thank you very much, everybody. I just wanted to just finish up with one or two of my own concluding remarks, actually. Now, I remember being in this chair a couple of years ago when there was a presentation about the tram extension and Leith Walk. And somebody in the audience said, the trouble with consultation is it all starts with a con. And I said at that meeting, well, let's take Leslie McInnes and the team at their word, because they said we're willing to listen. And I think they did listen. They listened on Leith Walk, and they're listening, and Daisy and Leslie and the team are listening about the city centre transformation. And I think we should carry on this conversation. And I think everybody here has been saying, tell us, keep telling us, keep talking about the things that we're doing right and the things that we can improve. Because actually, that's the thing that's starting to fuel the change. And I think there are very significant changes happening. You can see it on the street, more people are cycling. The open streets is starting to really take off. People are getting really excited. I saw someone posting on social media about the open streets who said, I was really sceptical about that whole idea, but you know what? I went down there and it was brilliant. It was quiet. I could hear the birds tweeting and I changed my mind. And I think that's a really powerful thing, to have these projects happening, but on the ground. We need them on the ground as quickly as possible. So there's work for us to do as audience participants, members, to carry on lobbying at a local level, but also at the government level. And I think there were some really good interventions today about some of that, the multiple levels of policy and campaigning that needs to go on, and Spokes, I know, works on that really hard. So thank you, everybody, for coming. Carry on Twitter and social media, talking about it, giving your thanks and love to all the team. I gave Leslie McInnes a cuddle in the supermarket one day, because Daisy'd been saying, it's been terrible, everybody's been getting us. So I saw her and I said, let me give you a hug and say, well done. So do that next time you see Leslie. Ask her permission first, though, I hasten to add. Okay. Right. Just to say, a final thing, that the Edinburgh Festival of Cycling has not yet finished. And there's a whole weekend of things happening. And if you're interested in thinking about cycling in a really different way, we've got Shannon Galpin coming back to talk about her work in Afghanistan. And we've got the premiere of her film about the Afghan women's cycle team, which is Sunday night. So thank you very much. I'll leave it there. Thank you.
I'd just like to say a very quick thank you before you all go to Caroline for sharing the Q&A so expertly for us, as usual. Also, that if any of you here aren't Spokes members, why on earth not? We could do with as many members as we can get, and we could do with people to help Chris and the rest of the planning team and the other groups with our consultations and our campaigning. So please do join up. And I'd also like to say a very special thank you to Augustine United, our host tonight, who put on an amazing service for us. And Graham, the caretaker, has very kindly learnt all about how to stream live a meeting in the last 24 hours, believe it or not. So a big thanks to Graham. And that live video should be available on our YouTube channel to watch once it's finished uploading and getting itself sorted out, so maybe sometime tomorrow. Thanks all very much, and look forward to seeing you in November, when I think we're going to be talking about transportation and bikes. In other words, cargo bikes and bike hires, and putting bikes to new uses and things. Thanks very much.